Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Virtual D Groups, the YouTube channel. I got a really important announcement that I need all of you guys to hear. So if you could just, Carl's gonna work some magic and show that right now.
Oh, hey there, friends. Jamie here. I'm just sitting here thinking about how much I miss all of your faces at youth group. So, to make sure that you don't miss mine, or Mark's, or Kelly's, or Brian's, make sure that you hit that like button, smash to subscribe, hit the little bell, get your notifications. We don't want you to miss out on any of our youth group content. We love you and we miss you, and we'll see you here each week.
I was really excited to be able to show you guys the youth building that's being built last week during our announcements. If you didn't get to see that, go back and look at it. There's some awesome images. And right now the church is working on an update so that you can see exactly what's going on in there. And it's really, really exciting. I'm sitting in an empty youth room right now, which makes me so sad. But like Brian's about to talk about in a little bit, soon we are all going to be united together. And we won't just be here in this youth room, which is awesome and we love, but we will be in the new building. And that is going to be a glorious day. I cannot wait for that. In the meantime, I miss you guys, and so I'm so glad you were participating in this virtual D groups. If you want to reach out, if you are want to reach out to me or Jamie or Kelly, we would love to hear from you guys. If you want to talk to us through Marco Polo, text us, give us a phone call, give us a FaceTime. All of those things are our favorite things to do with you guys because we haven't seen you in so very long. Thanks for participating in virtual D groups, but then also you could participate in virtual Bible study, which happens every single morning at 11 a.m. We have a group of people that are in there who we're reading the passage and then we're talking about it in a group meet. And we're about to start a new plan in a couple of days. So if you haven't been participating, we would love to have you come join. We are about to read through the entire New Testament in a year. So if you're thinking, you know what, I've never read all of the Bible, or I've never at least read all the New Testament, now's the time for you to start a plan. And exactly 1 year from now, hopefully we're in that new youth building and we will have read through the entire New Testament together each and every morning. So we'd love to have you there and join us in that. We love you guys. From me, Jamie, Charles, Kelly, we love you guys so much and we cannot wait to see you again. So without further ado, here is the main event. Your man and mine, Brian Hayworth. Who's the guy who is so wise? He's walking down the hall. He gives the talks. It's Brian. He's Christian's dad. He's Noah's dad too. Everybody give it up for Brian!
Hey, great to be with you guys again. It's weird that we keep on having to do these video sessions or times together, but I'm thankful for it. And I was so encouraged last week when I saw Mark's little intro to the video where he went and he and Carl went and did some video footage of the new youth lodge. And that was so encouraging to me, like this hopeful reminder that reminds us of something that's really true, is that it's gonna happen. We're gonna be meeting again. And not only are we gonna be meeting, but we're gonna be meeting in this new amazing home that's being built right now as you guys are watching this. And I just can't wait. It's awesome. And there's a little part of me that wondered, like, if the seniors, if you feel sad when you see that because you feel like you're going to miss out on that. But I want you to, I hope that you know that this is your legacy here that you helped create. It's yours too, and you will always be welcome. You were an important part of building that, and I'm so thankful for you guys. So it's just encouraging. I want you to know that I was talking to Mark about this yesterday. Mark and Jamie and Charles are planning right now for when we can be meeting again, and they're trying to figure that out. You know, we're taking things a little bit at a time as we can, but the plans are being created. So stay hopeful. We're starting to hear from the governor that things might be, reopening soon in phases. it's hard to wait because we don't know exactly the timing of everything or what it will look like. So we're just praying, and we're inviting you guys to pray along with us for an ability, for God to give us that ability to meet together soon, even if it's in really small groups or gradually, with the new interns coming up soon. But also pray for patience while we wait, like for all of us, that we'll be patient. We'll still listen to our parents, our leaders, on being careful and not just treating this as if nothing was going on still. So help us to pray for all of us to be patient and hopeful at the same time. I want you to think about, as we think about things maybe reopening or starting again, I just want you to take a pause before that happens. We don't know exactly how it will, but take a pause and think about, what is it that you want to remember from this crazy time? Like, what are some things that you have learned that you want to remember? Sometimes it takes an interruption to our normal lives to get us to think about our lives, to think about them, to pay attention to them, and think about what's really important. That was definitely the case for Esther, right? And we saw last week this huge change that took place in her life and the way that she chose to live it. And it happened because of this major interruption, this major thing that happened. I just want to invite you into the same thing. Like, before everything goes back to normal, we don't know exactly when, but before it does, take time to reflect and think about, what do I want to remember? So all this year, we've been talking about the story of everything. We were actually been going through that book. We'll finish it. We're almost done. We have one more chapter. We'll finish it before this is all done. But we've been talking about, it's called The Story of Everything, God's Plan for Everything. And we've been learning about how nothing and nobody in this story is unimportant. All the things matter. And he is this ultimate author that writes the best stories. Even before this virus took place, we were talking about somehow, how would we bring in this book of Esther? Because it's such a great example of the fact that he is a great storyteller. And it shows off his unbelievable crafting of a true story and the fact that he is at work, even when we're not sure. And we saw that last week. We saw Esther making this incredible turn from passive and weak to courageous and trusting. That was an incredible change in her character and her way of being. Because she listened to Mordecai. Remember, she listened to Mordecai, her older cousin's reminder that there was more to her life than just protecting herself or even her family. The fate of the entire Jewish people is at stake. And Mordecai tells her, this is something we didn't talk about last week, but it's really important. He tells her that even if she fails to act, that God won't, that God will act on behalf of his people. Remember, he's God. He doesn't need her. He can do whatever. He can choose any way to be able to save his people. But he wants to use her. He has written a part perfectly for her. And her story is one that he's inviting into his story. And so that's something that she trusted in. She listened to Mordecai, and she trusted that God had put her in this position with a purpose. And now she was willing to risk big. She was willing to risk her own life and all the things that made her comfortable to try to live out that purpose that God had for her faithfully. So she decides at the end of where we were talking last week, and we're going to recap that a little bit in the story as you watch the drama. But she decides that she must approach King Xerxes, and she's going to risk her life by doing so. And that is where the action is going to pick up for the next part of the story. So we're going to go to the drama, and we're going to recap just a little bit of how she gets to that decision, and then we're going to see her acting forward with her plan. So let's watch the story.
Esther's servants told her about Mordecai's weeping at the king's gate, dressed in sackcloth and ashes. She sent a servant to find out what was wrong with Mordecai. and he brought the message back and forth between Esther and Mordecai.
Here is a copy of the king's edict. Show it to Esther so that she can understand it. Then tell her to go to the king and beg mercy for her people.
Mordecai, if anyone approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has a law that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the golden scepter and spare his life.
Esther, don't think that just because you are in the king's palace, you alone of all the Jews will escape. If you remain silent, deliverance for the Jews will come from another place, but you will perish. Who knows but that you were made queen for such a time as this?
All right, Mordecai, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and nights. My maids and I will also fast. After that I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish.
Mordecai did all that Esther commanded him to do. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stands in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house. When he sees Queen Esther standing there, he holds out the golden scepter to her. Esther goes near and touches the top of the scepter.
What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half of the kingdom.
If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for him.
Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said.
My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said.
Haman leaves the palace, joyful and with a glad heart. But when he sees Mordecai in the king's gate and sees that he does not stand or bow before him, he is filled with anger against Mordecai. He restrains himself and goes home, and he tells his wife and friends of the great riches and promotion from the king. When he complains of Mordecai the Jew, his wife and friends urge him to make a gallows, and then they suggest to the king that Mordecai be hung on it. This suggestion pleases Haman, and so he has the gallows made.
I cannot sleep. Attendant, please bring the records of the Chronicles and read them to me.
The attendant reads about Mordecai, who had saved the king by recording the plot of the doorkeepers.
Mordecai has never been rewarded for his great service that he has paid me and the country. Who is in the court?
It is I, Haman.
Come in, please. Haman, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?
For the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal robe of the king be placed on him, and let him ride the king's horse, to which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let one of the king's most noble princes pray the man to be honored through the city square, and proclaim before him, "Thus shall it be done to the king, to the man whom the king delights to honor."
Hurry, take this robe, and get one of my horses, as you have suggested, and do all this for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken.
Haman takes the robe and horse, dresses up Mordecai in the king's robes, and leads him on horseback through the city square, just as he had recommended. Haman returns to his house in shame. While he is telling his wife and friends what has happened to Mordecai, the king's attendants come to take Haman McDonald? No, Haman. To take Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared.
A magnificent banquet, Queen Esther. Now, will you tell me your petition? Whatever it is, it will be granted to you. Up to half of the kingdom. It shall be done.
If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and it pleases the king, let my life be spared and the lives of my people. Also at my request, for we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed and to be killed. Had we been sold as slaves, I would not have bothered the king with such a matter.
Who is he? And where is he? Who would dare do such a thing?
The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman.
Haman is terrified before the king and queen. King Xerxes rises from the dinner in his anger and goes to the palace garden, while Haman stands before the queen Esther and pleads for his life. When the king returns from the garden, Haman falls across the couch where Esther is sitting. The king grows even more furious.
Will you attack the queen while I am in the house?
At these words, the attendants cover Haman's face. One of the king's servants tells the king about the gallows that Haman had made to hang Mordecai. The king instructs them to hang Haman on said gallows. And the king's anger subsides.
So the story seems, when we look at this story, it seems at first glance to be very typical, right? Like with a hero or heroine like Esther and a villain like Haman. And that's how we think of stories. Like it's very kind of typical is that we've got this hero or this heroine who are all good, and this villain as all bad. And it's like they're just two different kinds of people, villains and heroes. But if we look closer, they might not be so different, at least in what they're wanting at first. Both Esther and Haman start by wanting to be chosen and seeking approval from the king, from King Xerxes. They were both looking for someone outside of themselves to give them a sense of their value. Maybe we're not that different either. We want, like them, we want so bad to be liked, to be chosen, or seen as cool or important too. When I thought of this, I thought back to when I was in the 7th grade. My family moved. We were living in Puerto Rico for a while, and we moved from there to Tennessee. And I moved in the middle of 7th grade, and so I started at this new school. I started in the school in January. So all the other kids had been there, but there was another new person that started at the same time, and it was a girl. And her name was Suzanne Miller, and all of the boys were interested in Suzanne Miller. And she had everybody's attention, including mine. And I remember one of my friends one day told me, and I was so excited because he told me, hey Brian, guess what? In my math class, I saw that Suzanne Miller wrote your name on her shoe. And I thought that was the best news that I had heard in so long. I felt like I was in the in crowd suddenly. You know, like Suzanne Miller. I didn't only like her because of who she was. I liked her because all the other people liked her and she liked me. And that made me feel special. That's what I thought of when I thought of this story is I thought, like, I can relate to Haman. I can relate to Esther. I want to be valued, and I look to other people to give me that value. Maybe you can relate to that too. 2 weeks later, my friend gave me the bad news that he had seen Suzanne Miller erase my name from her shoe. And that was humbling. But there's a part of me that still relates, that still looks to other places to make me feel important, to make me feel special. And that's not that different than Haman or Esther. Our value is coming from comparing ourselves to others. And that's a type of pride. Tim Keller, one of my favorite pastors, I told you guys I've been really influenced listening to his sermons on Esther. And he talks about this part of the story that we're talking about right now, what happens in the story that you just saw, as possibly being able to save your life. That's pretty big. Why do you think he says that? It's because in this part we see two different choices on where Esther and Haman turn to look for their sense of value. They started in the same place, but that changes completely where they turn, and it makes all the difference in how they're going to live their lives and also the outcomes of their lives. And it can make all the difference for us. We can make the same choice. Where will we turn to know that we matter, that our lives are important, that we're special? The choice that we make, that you make, will determine how you live. And that's going to determine the outcome of your life. I wanted you to think for a second, what is your liquid of choice when you are so hot and thirsty? What the thing that not only tastes delicious, but it satisfies your thirst? Does a drink come to your mind? What about can you also think of a drink that tastes great, but it just doesn't quite satisfy your thirst? Like for me, this may be different for you, but like when I'm really hot and I'm really thirsty, drinking like an ice cold Coke, it tastes great, but because it's syrupy and sweet, like for some reason it doesn't quite satisfy my thirst in the same way that water does. Like, and unless I really am drinking water or maybe like an iced tea, like unsweet tea or something like that, that quenches, but like the Coke doesn't quite do it. That's what I think of when I think of our need for value and sense of being important and special, is that we sometimes go searching to these places that feel good, that taste good, but that can't quite satisfy. And we see that with Haman in this part of the story. We see that he was going searching for things that would seem like he has all that he needs, but it couldn't quite satisfy that thirst, that desire that he had for feeling important. Maybe it was hard for you to understand why that bothered him so much when Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. After all, he had been lifted to the highest position in the kingdom other than the king. And you would think that would be enough to satisfy that. Everybody else was bowing to him. Only, and we see this in the story, only he and the king had been invited to this first dinner and the second dinner that Esther has thrown, that she's planned. Now, he doesn't know Esther's plan, but that did make him feel good for a minute, is that he thought, hey, look at me. Only the king and I get invited to this. But even that went away completely whenever he saw that Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And it just didn't satisfy. Nothing seemed to fill that thirst that he had. Did you notice what Haman suggested that the king do whenever the king asked him? Remember this part of the story where the king, he's up all night for some reason. He can't sleep. This is no coincidence, right? Like God is keeping him awake, and he can't sleep, and he's thinking, and so he's bored maybe, and he can't sleep, and he's bothered, and so he asks that the book of his life be read to him. This is the narcissist that he is. He wants to hear about himself, and so he's listening to his own life when he can't sleep. And he hears this part of the story that had been covered earlier, where Mordecai had heard about a plot to have the king overthrown. And Mordecai had passed the message on to Esther, and Esther, that we saw that last week, had taken that to the king, and the king was saved. And so the king's hearing that part again, and he's remembering, and he comes to Haman, and he says, hey Haman, what should the king do? What do you think I ought to do to honor the man that delight, that I would delight in honoring him? And Haman, thinking that it's him, he is so excited about this, and it's kind of funny. Like, we as readers, we kind of know, like, he's not in the joke, but we are, like, and we know that this is not about him. But he comes up with this elaborate plan of what ought to be done for this man, thinking it's going to be him. Brenda, I was talking to her about the story, and she was saying, like, that part of the story feels like you're reading Shakespeare, because it's such an incredible part of the story. Like, it's how great storytelling is. It's got great irony, and it's got great use of timing and suspense and humor, but also incredibly meaningful outcomes at stake. it is like Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is a great storyteller, and he has learned that from the greatest storyteller, God. And so back to the story, Haman is asked what he thinks ought to be done for this man, and thinking that it's going to be him, he suggests that that man ought to get to wear the king's robes and exhibit all of the king's glory for himself. And he ought to ride the king's horse. And that would make him, like when a king is riding the horse, it gives him that appearance of a conqueror and having the strength and the power of a king. And he wanted the king's highest servants to honor that man, thinking it would be him again, to show his importance. And, you know, think about that, what he was looking for. Tim Keller points out something really amazing and humbling from this story, is that what Haman wanted was not wrong. Is what he wanted was to know this feeling, to feel that he was special, that he was worthy, and that he matters. It wasn't what he wanted that was wrong. It was where he turned that was wrong. He turned to the wrong king. He turned to King Xerxes. Remember that I told you, like, Tim Keller, when talking about this part of the story, he had said this part could save your life. Esther and Haman serve as guides for us to two very different ends, one to death and one to life. Haman looked to the king that seemed to have all that the world could offer. King Xerxes had power, had riches, beauty, and followers. And Haman tried to follow that king and to even be like that king. And it led to a wasted life. It was like drinking that unsatisfying drink that could never give that life-giving water. And Esther, who had started on that same path as Haman, following the same things that the world values, to think of what would make her life good, the crown, the king's blessing, position, beauty, riches, she had followed that same thing. But then she made that shift that we saw, and she risks it all to serve a better king. She believes that there is a drink that is better than all the world has to offer, and that will satisfy her longings. She chooses to serve God. She chooses to follow the king that would come to earth and give the clothes off of his own back for us. He would robe us in his robes to make us beautiful and pure like him, and to take our place in death so that we could live. King Xerxes, no earthly king would ever do that, but Jesus did. And Jesus hadn't even come to earth yet at the time of Esther, but she put her faith in the God that would send him, his own son for us. And because of that, she lived. Some of us pursue these desires for importance and value, and we chase after it in different ways in the world. And I think others of us try to ignore those desires. We try to, because it feels like it's impossible to satisfy them, or we don't see how we will, and so we just try to distract ourselves and entertain ourselves and not pay attention to it. But both of those are mistakes, because all we really need to do with those desires is to receive them, to receive the answer that God has given to us. He put those desires in us. It wasn't, like we said, it wasn't wrong that Haman wanted those things or that Esther wanted those things. It's where we turn for them. It's humbling to know that, like Esther and Haman, we turn away from God and we don't deserve his love. And it's humbling to know, and it's sobering to know that he had to die for us. It was that bad. But it is so free and so amazing to know that he did do that for us, because he loves us that much, and it's done, it's accomplished. We can receive it. And so now, when we really let that in, he invites us into his story like he does Esther. Remember when I told you last week, I wanted you to try to listen in behind the noise, behind all the other things that are going on in your lives, to what God is up to right now. He's up to something with you and with your life right now. He has kind of pushed pause on our lives right now in some ways. And I'm asking you, will you take this opportunity to listen, to ask God, to consider how he loves you and how he will satisfy all those needs and desires that you want, and then join in his story. Have you been turning to other sources to fill that up? We all do. Try to pay attention to that, and then trust the author of this amazing story, of your story, that he wishes to give you more than you could ever think to ask. Take some time to reflect on that this week. I hope this story helps you to do that. My mission for you for this week is to finish the book of Esther. We'll be done with it. We're going to finish the last part next week. Thank you guys for going over it with me this week. I've enjoyed it, and I'm praying for you. I love you guys.
Woo! Yeah, Brian! Woo!